Hi, how you doing? Justin here. Welcome to TR-101, and in this lesson we're going to be talking about the process of transcribing. Now there's a kind of a set little 10-step program I've got for you here that goes through all of the different stages that you need to go through when you're transcribing. And it's really important that you get a good understanding of each one. And also remember that all of this is written down perhaps in a little bit more detail on the website. Remember, this is a web-based course. So the first thing, really important, is listening. You absolutely must give a whole load of listens to the thing that you're going to transcribe before you start. Often if I'm transcribing a solo, I put it on a little loop in my transcribing program and I'll listen to it 10, 20 times in a row before I even start transcribing it. I'm trying to get to the point where I can hear the solo without the solo playing, so I can close my eyes and imagine the whole solo. Can I sing it along? If it's something that's in my range that I could sing, can I sing it? That kind of level of knowing. I'm sure you've got it at the moment. If you think of one of your favorite guitar solos of all time, you can kind of close your eyes and imagine the solo because you would have listened to that song a whole load of times. So that's kind of what we're getting to, that's what you've got to aim for when you're learning a new song. So that listening thing, really important. Really important. Stage one, listening. Second thing, tune your guitar. Right? All of the stuff in this course is going to be at A440. Way later in the course, we're going to deal with what to do if you end up with a song that's in a different tuning or the guitar is out of tune. But for now, always assume, and actually as a general rule, always assume at first that the song that you're working out is in regular tuning, and make sure your guitar is perfectly in tune, because it can make life real difficult if you're trying to work out this note and you're hearing an E and you're playing an E, but it doesn't sound right. It's going to really throw you off, so that's really important. It's really important, right? So don't forget this one. Make sure your guitar's in tune, right? Okay, step 3 we've got. Now this is a really important thing. We're going to cover this in a following lesson, which is learning to pause so you just hear one note at a time. Now this is a really important kind of part of the process, and if you stick to this, it'll make the whole course easier and your ability to learn transcribing easier as well. I've seen students before ignore this one tip and they've had a real fight with it the whole way. So what the idea is you're going to listen through the song, and once the note has played that you want to transcribe, you're going to hit pause. Because the last thing that you hear stays in your ear. There's a little rhyme for you. The last thing you hear stays in your ear. Really important, right? So when you're going through and you're listening to the song and you hit that pause, that sound, that last one you hear is still sitting around here, and then you've got to try and find it on the guitar. You find it and you write it down. Then you go through and you listen again, and you listen through one note further and you pause again. So one note further than what you've got written down, and you're listening through that note comes pause. That sound's ringing around in your ear, then you find that note and you write it down. That's the process, one note at a time, right? Way later in the course or in your transcribing career, you'll start to learn whole licks. So if I'm learning an Eric Clapton solo, I know a lot of his licks already, so I'll listen, I'll go, oh, he's played that lick, and I'll write down that whole lick. But that's something that you don't even want to entertain when you're first learning to transcribe. Don't even think about trying that, right? Just get used to doing this one note at a time thing. It might seem a little slow, and you might get the feeling that I'm sure I could do 2 or 3 notes at a time if I tried, but you'll be introducing a bad habit. So really, if you're new to transcribing, then stick with this one note at a time thing. It really will make a big difference. That's straight up. Part 4, write it down. Now, the reason that you want to write it down is because unless you've got some amazing memory, by the time you get to the end of the solo, you've probably forgotten the beginning of it. Now, some of the most amazing transcribers that I've met transcribe the whole solo into memory first and wait a few days and then write it down. Now, that is really awesome if you can do that. My memory's not good enough, right? And I suspect that for many of you, that will be the case as well. So I always write it down as I go. Every note, every lick, as I've done it, I write it down in the tab. And we've got a lesson coming up on writing it down as well, because that's also, in fact, I think writing it down is the next lesson. So that's really important that you learn how to write down those tabs. And I'd really recommend you do it just freehand as well. Don't start trying to use a kind of a tab generation program at the beginning. Learn to write it by hand and learn to write it neatly, and how to phrase it across a line, how to write it down nicely over a whole line, that kind of thing. Because those skills come even more important when you start putting things into a tab program. So learning to write it down, really important as well. Next thing, rest. Now, our ears get tired when you're transcribing a lot, and especially if you're first starting out and you're new at transcribing, doing 10 or 15 minutes of transcribing is a lot. Right? That's really going to wear your ears out a bit. So after you've done 10, 15 minutes, have a break. Have 5 minutes off, Go and have a coffee, walk around outside. Don't listen to music, you know. Let the silence kind of clean your ears out a little bit. But having breaks is a really essential thing. I often find if I'm doing a big transcription, I'll spend, you know, a couple of hours one day working on this song, and I'll come back the next day to listen to it, and I'll hear all sorts of things that I hadn't heard, especially the last part of it when my ears had kind of got a bit clogged. So the rest thing's almost as important as actually the transcribing. So again, I'm a big fan of using timers. I know it seems a little bit ridiculous, but I'll use a timer and set it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and I'll do 10-15 minutes transcribing, then I'll stop and I'll go for a quick wander around the studio, or, you know, do something else for a bit, check an email, or do whatever. So, you know, it's really important, I think. The next thing to be doing is to be playing your transcription along with the original recording. Now, most times you're probably not going to be doing that at full speed right away. So what you want to be doing, hopefully using a transcribing software program, which is what I'd recommend for all of you. And all of those things have the ability to knock the tempo down to 50% or 60% or whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. If it's a really complicated song, you might be knocking the tempo down to 30%, 40%. If it's not too difficult, maybe you just knock it down to 70%, whatever. Too many variables to tell you to do a specific thing there. But what you want to do then is play the original recording and play along with it and make sure that you've got it right. You know, that's a really important thing. The further down the way you get, it'll become more important, because you'll be working out, could he have actually done that? Am I in the right position? Is that note on that string or on that string? That kind of thing. There's a little bit more detective work that you have to do later on. But to start off with for now, you're just really checking that you've got the notes right. So once you've transcribed it and written it down, slow it down and then play along with the recording. That's a really important thing. Now, once you've got that and you're happy that you've played it along and it's good, the next thing, stage 7, is to check it. Now, if you're by yourself and you're doing a completely new song, or if I'm doing a tune that I don't know of any transcriptions of, there's no way of checking it. So you just have to be really confident in your own transcribing. But if it's possible, and most times these days it can be a really interesting thing to check it. Now, remember that a lot of the transcriptions you'll find on the internet are done by people like yourself that are learning to transcribe, and they think they've transcribed it and put it up. So you've got to be confident with what your own ears are telling you as well. But it can be very interesting to look at what other people have written and what they've heard. You know, I still use it now particularly if I'm doing kind of harder jazz things or chord solos. I find it really helpful. I buy regularly jazz transcription books, not to use them outright. I transcribe it first, and then I'll check against it, and I'll go, oh wow, that note, yeah, maybe that was there. You know, and then I'll go and listen to it again and decide if I'm right or they're right. You know, and it tends to be about 50-50. Half the time I think I'm right and they're wrong, and the other half of the time I think that they're right and I was wrong. So checking it can be a really useful thing. You've got the access to the internet, the world's biggest library, right? So you've got a lot of resources there. In this course, you can get the answer sheet from the forum, right? So once you've finished, there'll be a link at the lesson page. It takes you to the forum, and then you can go there and pick up an answer sheet. So you can check your work there. I would recommend that you do kind of the whole of one particular lesson before you check it, rather than just bit by bit. But it's really up to you again on that. Now, point 8, really important one that we kind of touched on in that little intro thing, which is don't get discouraged, right? So if you do it and you find that most of the notes that you've got wrong, then try not to take it to heart and think that you're totally hopeless, because most people will get a lot wrong. When I look at my early transcriptions, I've got a book actually I found a little while ago in underneath my mum's house of all of the early stuff that I worked out, loads of Rolling Stones and Chuck Berry and stuff like that, and it's so wrong, so wrong. It's kind of funny. The version I worked out of Money for Nothing is just absolutely incredibly bad. It doesn't sound anything like it, you know. So, you know, you're going to grow. Just as a guitar player, you get better the more you practice. You get better with your transcribing too. The more you transcribe, the better your transcriptions will be, the more accurate they'll be, the more that you'll start to hear what string stuff's on or what fingering they might have used for a particular lick. But that stuff only comes with experience. You can't expect to have that at the beginning. It just ain't going to happen. So that's important just to mention there after you've checked it. Stage 9 I've got is to analyze it. Now, this is something we're going to go into a little bit toward the end of this course, but the understanding of what it is that you've just done is probably the key to being able to use it. So if you transcribe a Wes Montgomery jazz guitar solo and you work it all out and you can play it along with the record, that's great and everything, but what's really going to be useful is if you start looking at what he's playing. So you transcribe the chords as well as the solo, and you start comparing the solo to the chords and go, oh, over that G7, he played the notes B, D, F, and A. Oh, wow, that's kind of like it's a B half diminished arpeggio or whatever, you know. So when you start to analyze it, you can then take the ideas from the things that you've transcribed and apply them into your, and kind of make them your own, you know, use them in your own way, and it starts to influence your own style of playing, you know, and that's really important too. So that analysis part is, it's a big deal. It requires understanding of theory and harmony, and it's kind of complicated, but it's not, like I said, we're going to touch on it a bit, but it's such a big topic, I think that's one that could be going for quite some time. And the last thing, point number 10, is to make sure that you enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, at least a bit, and like I said, it's going to be frustrating, but I still want you to enjoy the process. And if you're really not enjoying it and you don't want to be a professional guitar player, then go out and just play some songs and enjoy doing that. Because there'll come a point where you feel like you need to transcribe, and when you hit that point and you do it, you'll feel that kind of sense of accomplishment that you get when you're transcribing. And even if it's really hard, even if you feel hopeless and that you're no good and that you're never going to be able to do it, at the end of that practice session, you'll feel like, yeah, I enjoyed that. That was good. It was rewarding. Maybe I shouldn't say enjoying it. Maybe I should say rewarding. You know, it's a bit like mountain climbing or whatever. You know, it can be a real hard slog sometimes. But when you get to that top and that sense of achievement's awesome. So it's really important that you try and enjoy this process and train yourself to enjoy it, and not go, oh, I've got to go and do that transcribing stuff. I really hate that. Don't go to it like that. If you feel like that, just leave off transcribing and do some other stuff, you know. If you want to be a professional guitar player, I don't really think you've got any choice, to be honest. But anyone else, if you're not enjoying it, I would recommend not doing it. Okay, well, I think that's about it for this lesson now. So the next lesson is about writing your tab, actually how to write it down and the different symbols involved. So let's get on to that now, and I'll see you for that in a sec. Bye-bye.